Welcome, Benjamin. I'm very happy to have you here to talk about co-creating the third attractor.
Thank you.
And I always start with one question and then we take it from there. Are you familiar with the term, the third attractor? And
yes.
if yes, can you give us a little description from your understanding, how you understand the third attractor and what we are trying to do here, and then we take it from there.
Well, first, I'm not well versed in systems theory, so I don't know that I can speak to the metaphor exactly as Daniel Schmachtenberger would has put it forward exactly. But I think the idea translates to a lot of various intuitions and hopes and aspiration that many of us feel and many have very beautifully written about and expressed as to what might be possible for humanity to pivot in a way that would allow us to both continue as a species and somehow enter into a reconciliation with nature and ourselves. And I think in many ways it describes the possibility of a transformation. So I think, for example, often I talk about the meta crisis. And when we think of it in terms of a problem that needs to be solved, we're kind of on a problematic, we're in problematic territory just with that way of thinking of it, because it's as if the human pattern as it has been and has led us to this predicament can somehow solve those very conditions that it gave rise to. So there's kind of a circular logic that I think we do well to avoid by not thinking in the problem solution framework.
Yeah. No, that's an interesting point. And just to add, I totally agree with your definition of the third attractor. And third, because the first and the second trajectory that we might be on is one of going into authoritarianism and the other one going into chaos. That's how Daniel Schmachtenberger originally described it. And so what we are talking here is, do we find a different way? And that's a question that I am thinking a lot about, and I'm curious what you say. Can we actually create a third attractor? Is it an active doing to create a third attractor, or is it something that we just hope and believe is emerging? What is your take on that?
Well, it's interesting that it's almost as if chaos and authoritarianism can both happen at the same time. It almost looks as if that's what's playing out. But as to whether we can create it, I think it wants to be created. And since I like to think of the idea of flourishing, and flourishing seems to be something that life inherently wants to do. And we are part of life. And any of us who've cared for a pet or a houseplant know that when you get the conditions right, it will, on its own, tend toward flourishing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's not a matter of creating the third attractor, such as identifying what conditions are most conducive to that flourishing to happen.
Mm-hmm. And you want to go a little bit into these conditions in your way of thinking, and probably also tell us a little bit about what you are doing, what you are up to it looks like from what I have read that you are very much up to creating this third attractor very actively in the projects you're in. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when one considers the meta crisis, many who I talk to have had a similar experience where you kind of go around a sort of laundry list. There's climate change and inequality and extreme poverty and ecological degradation. And at some point, many of us arrive to the issue of media. And there's a way in which we can even think of that perhaps as a central um, crisis among the many others,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
because our mode of communicating and making meaning is really at the heart of how we organize and what we manifest as a society. So that's the area that I've been most inspired to focus on. I believe that it's not a question of not knowing what to do. I think the quote unquote solutions, I'm using that carefully because
mm-hmm,
of problem solution
mm-hmm.
danger before, but um, it has been so well studied at this point. We understand climate science and economics and the dynamics of inequality and poverty and the nature of justice and freedom. And that's, there's just been such a wealth of understanding and wisdom. And they're all, and beautiful books have been written and talks and speeches given, but they tend to be on a shelf some way relative to the entire population, pretty limited in their accessibility and availability. So too with personal growth, I think it's pretty clear that if this transformation can happen, it will involve both an inner and an outer dimension. And things like Advaita Vedanta go back thousands of years. You know, there's been so too a wealth of study and learning and practice and lineages and schools that have worked out in great detail paths or ways by which transformation can occur. But again, not readily accessible and what we could call universal availability to the general population.
And I would add, and universal acceptance to the general population, because there are big pockets of the general population that would push back against this kind of inner development, spiritual inner development, or also push back on climate change being real. I mean, it's in a way even worse than you describe it, because while I enjoy your optimism that it's all well documented and we know enough about everything, all the big problems or challenges or the things that we would want to be transformed, it's also true that there is more pushback against all of these insights than there ever was. That's at least my perception, and pushback from very intelligent people. No?
Indeed, yes. I think even the whole concept of that there is an inside, the
Yeah,
dominant view seems to be that has basically won the day, really, is this scientific materialism, which claims that it's basically dead matter somehow bootstrapped itself into this kind of complexity, which
yeah,
by no way that can be explained gives rise to consciousness.
yeah.
But materialism also says what's real is what you can measure. The experience is an epiphenomenon or an illusion.
Of the brain.
So we are, and then that's how the system of education, and because that's kind of the dominant view which we are born into, it is a very tall order to make the flip where you start to see things in a different way.
Yeah, yeah, and if the materialists go into the interior, it's mostly psychological interior. That's also an interesting distinction we can make here. Yeah? Like between the psychological self-development. I think many of the secular materialists do believe in self-development and psychological development and working on your trauma and shadows and things like this. But that's not going deep enough when you are spiritually inclined, when you believe in something deeper, more profound, then that's just not deep enough to catalyze this transition that you seem to have in mind that needs to happen.
Yes. I think the big shift involves identity, who we
Yeah.
take ourselves to be. But there are scientific ways of approaching that too. If one heard it said in another talk that we each have a pair of lungs, but that's completely meaningless without forests. You know, we have kidneys that don't matter outside of a hydrologic cycle and the planet that grew us. So thinking ourselves as contained by the skin does not make scientific sense. And there are other arguments, that are starting to happen in quantum physics, for example, that are leading us to a realization that a non-dual conception of reality makes more sense of what we are seeing evidentially in quantum physics than some of the interpretations, like many worlds, that say there's an infinite number of universes coming into existence in every microsecond, which with no evidence.
Yeah. No, I think we are totally aligned in our, not even a belief, in our realization of a non-dual reality that is the ground of our experience and the ground of what is happening here all around us and is moving forward. So let's go a little bit into how do you think that this, I don't even know how to call it, worldview, or this way of seeing life, seeing the world, seeing us as part of this process that is moving forward. How do you plan to bring this forward so that it's more accessible for more people?
Well, my area of interest is in the lower right, we would say, to use the integral frame.
Yeah.
And so, for example, the university system, in the lower right frame, it would be there's a campus, there are buildings, there are different departments, there's way you organize a curriculum. There's ways of categorizing different knowledge and establishing stages through which a student would progress. But when you think of, most people, when you use the word media, there's kind of two main ways people think about it. There's the media, as in an institution that, well, used to have a certain function to inform, educate the public, and be a watchdog on public officials. But learning and the development of acquiring knowledge and gaining capacities is not part of the media. This is assumed to be elsewhere, and that those who participate in media, or these days it's really just consuming media, would have received this education elsewhere. So part of our goal or opportunity in the lower right is to bring more of a holistic approach to the design of a media platform that brings not just communication, conveyance, and consumption of information, but engagement and learning, and participation in media's function of informing society and helping us to participate in the evolution of our society. So,
yeah, I feel like I want to challenge your assumption that you are focused on the lower right. I do think that what you are describing here is a four-quadrant approach, because it only works if you take the four quadrants into account. And
course.
I hear you four-quadrant describing, and not just lower right. But what I also hear is that you're very aware that the lower right probably needs the most change to reach more people. Would you agree?
Yeah, that's the area that I was personally drawn to, because I see it as underdeveloped relative to so much of the great work and understandings and teachings and things that are going on in elsewhere. But I agree I don't think you can really even think of quadrants except in their
Exactly.
relationship as they co-arise. And I don't think any of them are causal. They co-involve each other.
Yes, exactly. The only thing that one probably can say is that sometimes one quadrant goes a little bit ahead to pull the others. Like it's almost like, yeah, I think it's impossible that they always co-arise exactly together. So you have to give it a little bit of a spin in one quadrant to then take the others with you. When I was reading your white paper, or however you call it, I was very compelled by the term reti. I don't know even how you would say. Can you say a little bit something about it, what it means? And then I tell you why I was so compelled by it.
It's an acronym that stands for Rapidly Emergent Transpersonal Intelligence.
Yeah.
So this is the thesis. It's basically saying that the kind of human, or the kind of humanity, that is capable of living in accord with the biosphere that grew us and makes life possible, that humanity and its pattern, how it relates to the biosphere, we could think of it as its ecological load, for example, is that version of us and the economic systems that it implies is so different from the system that we have now, the pattern of humanity that exists now, that it's tantamount to a new species in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's helpful to consider it as an emergent evolutionary phenomenon. And there are the magnitude of systemic changes. It's, if you think of retooling civilization, which is really what it amounts to, has
Yeah.
never happened before. It's a level of magnitude and complexity and challenge that is beyond the scale of and the cognitive capacity of any of us individually. It will involve some type of transpersonal, eco-noetic transformation. If you imagine an economic system that is intelligently calibrated to the carrying capacity of our planet, both inputs and outputs, the generative services that the biosphere provides and the absorptive services that our waste puts back into the biosphere, is so different from a growth-based economics that just says, we're going to keep growing and growing and growing. I just find, because that difference is so extreme, that it's more helpful to think of it in terms of an evolutionary emergence. And once we do that,
Yeah.
we can start to reason what are the conditions that make it most likely to occur, rather than saying, oh, we're just going to be who we already are and how we already have been, but we're going to have some idea to solve this problem so we can keep on being who we are.
Yeah. No, and it will not work like this. I totally agree. And I deeply connect with the transpersonal part of what you're describing. Not only transpersonal in the sense of towards nature or being more aware that we are not isolated, that we are part of nature, but also in our human interactions. I think it needs the transpersonal aspect to get us out of our overly self-focus, out of the narcissism that is so dominant, out of the selfishness, because many of the not so healthy patterns that we see now have a lot to do with simple selfishness, no? That people think for themselves first, and not for the planet, not for other people, not for the universe. So the transpersonal for me resonates a lot with just pushing out our identity boundaries. You mentioned identity too, yeah? Like identify with the whole and not with this small part, and then take decisions that reflect that identification.
Yes. And I think that's what nature does. I think we are gradually increasing the sphere of self. First, we believe it's just me and, my little nuclear family, and then you start to identify as part of a group, and then a society, and eventually those of us who are lucky enough to be in a affluent society and have had all of our sustenance needs met can eventually realize, wow, it's really the planet that is doing all of this, not me inhabiting a planet, but me as an expression of life itself. And then your sphere of care and concern is encompassing the whole. So your
Yeah.
motives, as Andrew used to say, your motives completely change.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. What I am not clear is how this all can happen fast enough in a world where most people still have to go through all these different stages of worldviews, of value systems, of this identity expansion. No, like the majority of the how many billion people that are now on the planet are in a different place, have not gone through all this development. So therefore, I'm curious how you think the change happens. Is it happening in small pockets all over the world and then slowly expanding, or do you believe in a big shift of any kind, or what's your vision or your hope or your hope probably?
Well, as I've understood things like spiral dynamics and the history of our evolution through various stages, the amount of time from the previous stage to the next keeps getting shorter and shorter.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one place where I draw some substantiation to the idea that it can go fast. Another is the degree of connectedness and level of compute that we have available relative to times past. I think with the right kind of design, access to this technology-enabled connection can also be an accelerator. So I don't know what's gonna happen or whether it can actually happen. There's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
good reasons to think that it's too late for us. But I do know that we can use this inner growth technology, for lack of a better word, all of these great understandings that many of the people on your series have already expressed, and apply them in a type of media architecture
Yeah.
that can make them much more accessible. So
Yeah. Would you say that there is a minimal agreement about this new worldview or these new values that has to be achieved? In my conversation with Rob, he speaks of this I forgot the term, but it's kind of a minimal worldview that one has to agree if one wants to cooperate through different organizations, different initiatives towards the third attractor. There has to be at least a minimal agreement about certain values. Would you agree with that? Or do you more think like we have to integrate all the worldviews and bring them together one way or the other?
I don't think it's possible to um, create a homogeny of values. I think it's normal and natural for there always to be a mix, just in the same way that in any society there will always be infants and adolescents and adults and so on. But the second tier consciousness, when the design of an environment comes from that place, is uniquely suited to craft experiences that give the appropriate support, to express the most healthy aspects of each stage, and B, provide the supports that allow one to fully experience and embrace and not make evil or wrong or crazy that particular stage. So the each of us can then, Jeff Salzman used to put it, have a belly full of that worldview stage in order to experience the evolutionary limits and tensions that give rise to moving into the next.
Yeah, I just feel in myself that I know the theory, but in practical terms, when you take modernism and its focus on growth, on material wealth, on this more and more and more, I struggle to see in myself, just thinking about it, how, even if I'm aware and I have that part in myself too, how this will be integrated in this new worldview that is, as you said at the beginning, not just an evolution. It's kind of a revolution from what we see presently. No, it's a totally, it's a transition. It's something totally different, because you cannot just take step by step by step into this new way of thinking. So I wonder what needs to happen for this to be able to exist in parallel, all these different worldviews, at least the traditional, the modern, the postmodern, and then the integral.
Well, there are, among the plurality of different worldviews that are always in the mix together, there also are universals. We are all human beings, and we are all on the same planet, and we all have similar needs. And so our approach in designing this media environment is to bring a synthesis of these, what we call universal engagement modalities. So for example, narrative is one of them. Story. A story structure, regardless of where you are on the spiral, is intuitive and natural. We learn history from a story structure. We experience news and information in a story structure. We explore morality and meaning through a story structure. So, for example, films and television and story. So, creating using narrative as a structure for the media environment is one example of these, what I call enablements, that allow both the plurality of all the different worldviews and a universality of what's natural and intuitive for all humans. So the idea is to, and we use 4 of these narratives, so that's 4 of these modalities: narrative, theater, learning, and play. All of those are universal enough that every human being, regardless of ideology, language, background, worldview, there's just something in us that is naturally able to engage in these modalities. Play, for example.
So, yeah, just to understand you, the idea is to present this new worldview in these narrative structures, in these play structures, in the theater structures, as an attractor, or
Sure, that's one way to think of it. From an experience point of view, I don't think we would bring that kind of abstract theory into it. It's more that Irving Goffman wrote a book called The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. And he was a sociologist, and he felt that the language of theater and dramaturgy were very useful in understanding human social dynamics. So, for example, in any given day, we change characters. So you wake up, you're a spouse, or you're a parent, or you're a son or daughter. You open your door, now you're a neighbor. You get on the bus, you are a passenger. You go to work, you have those roles. And it's just something really natural in humans to play these different roles and show up in ways that we expect each other to, with certain sets of sensibilities and mannerisms and so forth. So there's a way, and even in this interaction, we are taking turns as performer and audience. So there's a way in which we can think about human life as performative. And theater has a magical power of presenting a sort of liminal space that is removed enough from the everyday world that allows us to sort of safely consider other viewpoints, other feelings, and relate to them. So if we think of the meta crisis not as this problem that we have to solve, but the way the story is playing out, and we project into the future, how is this story going to go? Well, the way it's going is toward a self-terminating ecocidal collapse. And if you extrapolate what's actually happening now, you can see that being played out into the future. And that's how the story is going. And when you present this in a way that one recognizes, even down at my choices that I make right now today, through the actions that I'm taking and the inactions, the things that I let happen and don't choose, I am participating in that arc, that storyline. And if in that same environment we present another possible future, and we show right down to the level of policy, taxes, regulations, treaties, institutions, what are those micro changes that would change the story in that direction? You don't have to confuse people with what's the theory and what are the spirals and which quadrant am I in and what's the theory of change. It's just, which story are you, in what way you're just bringing the light to show what story you are participating in, either by what you're doing or by what you're not doing. So that's an example of one way that we use narrative, but also make the story enactable. So this is where there's one thing into telling a story, but there's another thing in performing the story.
Yeah.
So when we use this metaphor of, as Shakespeare said, all of the world is a stage, it's something that's intuitive and relatable, and provides a structure where it's not, activism. It's very hard to think of it that everything has gone terribly wrong, therefore it's up to you to fix it, and you just have to bear it. I mean, that's true, but you can say the same thing in a different way that makes it more inspiring and conducive to our impulse to live the hero's journey. as individuals and as collectives.
Yeah, so I understand that you want to make the situation we are in an experience for people, or make it more conscious what we are doing and what we are, the situation we are in, and put out attractors or different ways of thinking and acting that would be obviously better than what we are in now, in a way of narratives and play and theater, like very experiential and not as a dry theory of what should be, but as something that people could experience and say, yeah, oh yeah, this feels much better than what we are in.
Yeah. What we're building is aiming very largely to younger generations.
Yeah.
And when you take in what's happening in the world, it's pretty clear that this collapse is either already inevitable or rapidly taking place. And that's just not an inspiring world to be. And it gives rise to this mountain of cynicism and apathy and resignation that we are seeing. And when the only media environment you have access to is designed specifically to hijack your attention and sell it to advertisers so as to perpetuate that very uninspiring future, there's no there's no way to want to be involved in turning it around. You just don't see how your engagement could possibly make a difference.
Yeah.
But I think there is tremendous latent civic energy that, because people are smart, it's not that people are lazy, that here in the US there's very low civic engagement. And in our research, it's because people believe that their efforts are futile.
Yeah.
So, and that's largely because the tools and media landscape that we have access to, and the institutions that would, and in the past have, we've been able to utilize to steer society or have some agency in our future, have largely been captured by for-profit interests and the status quo that keeps us politically impotent.
Yeah. I think where I still struggle to see an alternative is, like, I remember when the internet came, or then when the first social media platforms appeared, like Facebook, many people thought, oh, that's actually how we can now make sure that everybody has an objective view. We are not dependent on official media anymore. We are now, we can curate our own experience. We can engage with the people we want to engage. We can hear everybody out. But it didn't turn out like this. It's more confusing and more distracting, and more spreads more untruth than ever, than even before all the social media has happened. So what I'm curious to hear from you, what are your thoughts? What would need to be different for this not to create a different network that has all the same downsides again? What is the essence of what needs to change in the media landscape?
Well, let's see. It's certainly not about adding more content to the existing
Yeah,
environment, because you just add confusion.
yeah,
And it's certainly not just like it's not an open mic concept where anybody can say anything to anyone at any time.
yeah.
Imagine a court of law. If there aren't structures and rules and processes, the only thing that can take place is a kind of pandemonium. So it's fine for there to be an open mic. I think that's important. We're not saying we're replacing it. People enjoy existing media platforms. That's fine, but there's a lot of work that shows, especially some of them patterns like infinite scrolling and algorithms that are designed specifically to emphasize outrage and other of our base proclivities, have detrimental effects on our mental health. We're saying there's a need for another kind of environment that's more formalized and structured. And instead of flatland open mic, it provides a kind of natural hierarchy, not a dominator hierarchy, that allows depth.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be one part of the answer. Another part is, so I was saying before, media is supposed to be this thing here that assumes learning is happening over in these other institutions, and also civic engagement is happening over in still yet other places. So you're supposed to get your news here, then you're supposed to go to a voting booth over there, then you're supposed to write to your elected leaders there, and it's not connected. So part of the design philosophy is a holistic approach,
Mm-hmm.
and bringing in what we would call flourishing patterns or developmental patterns. So all of this knowledge that we know from how human beings develop on the inside, these personal growth and inner growth technologies
Mm-hmm.
being applied to how the media environment works. So there's many layers to it that would take a lot of time for me to go in fully, but this application of universal modalities and the holistic integration of functions and the utilization of inner growth technologies together makes possible a very different and health-centric type of environment.
Mm-hmm.
And so where it connects to, well, I don't want to be engaged when I believe my efforts are futile. And this is the issue of public power. And I think Daniel Schmachtenberger beautifully laid this out in his one of the talks that I saw about the Third Attractor, where he identifies both governments and institutions as one of the players. There are these social organization, and then there are these hyper agents. Well, one of the players that's missing is we, the people, this idea of public power. And one of the reasons you believe your efforts are futile is because the only avenues available to you are showing up with a picket sign, which doesn't work so well anymore when the media
Mm-hmm.
are co-opted, or other atomized methods of participation. Whereas a corporation, very powerful and effective system of human organization, works through specialization, the division of labor, organization into different roles. And in corporate software, groupware, there are lots of great approaches to how you leverage this power of specialization to achieve synergies and incredible power. Something similar to that is what we need to apply to civic engagement.
Mhm. So you believe strongly in a bottom-up approach to empower people for their civic engagement to create change, bottom up.
I think that's the one that is has been most neglected, and that's the most difficult. I think where the bottom moves is able to apply different incentives and disincentives to the top.
Yeah,
But I do think it
you
requires
see
both.
where I have my doubts, and I'm happy and open to be convinced, but where I have my doubts is I would believe in this kind of bottom-up approach if we were already in a society of transpersonal consciousness where people are able and willing to think and vote and make decisions that are bigger than themselves, their self-interest. But as long as we are in societies that we have now, I admit I doubt the intelligence of the crowd, the intelligence of the swarm in the world we are living in right now.
Yeah. Crowds have a part to play, but can be very dangerous. The way we want to structure this is in small group units. And Eleanor Ostrom laid this out very beautifully. And David Sloan Wilson talks about this also in his pro-social book, that when it's properly structured, a small group unit is where that's doing meaningful and inspiring work, and each person has a role that they can see how it contributes. That's when we are happiest and healthiest and most effective. So it's definitely not an apparatus for crowds. That can be, for the reasons you said, very problematic and dangerous. But there are ways to design around small group units with audiences.
Mm-hmm. I think my question sits where, how do you size this up? What is the vision for sizing it to all of human beings? I can see it. Everything makes total sense to me when you think small, even small prototype communities. Even there, it's quite challenging. But let's say I can see that it can work in a small environment. Where I struggle in myself to see how it can be sized up to actually reach a tipping point where this can be more than single prototype ideas and communities, but have an effect on the culture at large.
The communities have to be aware of each other and in a coordinated way, such that when one network, say in Buenos Aires or Paris, solves or comes up with an approach in carrying out a particular objective, that knowledge, that know-how becomes available everywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a multi-scale public sphere that we are building,
Mm-hmm.
even down to the level of families and friendships, to neighborhoods and municipalities and regions, states, nations. And the unifying vision that holds it together is that narrative structure that I was describing earlier.
Yeah.
And this is the weird part. It can't, the system itself cannot take a position in a way. So if humanity on the whole doesn't want to transform, and this is like, Terry Patton used to say, maybe this is a palliative kind of project, then we have to allow that. We have to be free, but we want to make that transparent. So if you are deciding that you are on the side of humanity does not deserve to continue, then at least your decision is going to be visible and known in that context. And that's the story that you are telling. That's kind of counterintuitive, but I believe that's an aspect that has to be there.
Yeah, I try to understand what you're saying here, because when I was reading what you sent me, I didn't feel that you didn't want to take a position. I felt like there is a new way of thinking expressed in what you plan to do or what you are in the process of doing that does take a position.
Yes, I personally have a very strong position.
Yeah, but you feel the system cannot have a position, but just provides the framework in which it can reveal itself where people want to go.
Yeah, well, if
Or did I
authoritarianism
misunderstand
is
what you said?
if authoritarianism means absolute rule, it removes personal agency and freedom from the picture.
Yeah,
So the other side of that is, that means, as imperfect as it's been, we have to continue self-governance. We have to preserve it. We have to advance it. And that means the authority, if it's not going to be in some charismatic dictator, has to be in each of us. So the atoms of a free self-governing society is the individual in certain function. There's a sensing function, then there's a meaning making, a deliberation function, and then there's a response. That's what I called in the paper the reciprocal cognition. That's basically
yeah,
what's happened. We want to make that available to the greatest depth possible, and then the flourishing patterns. So, for example, spiral dynamics as a system. Once you notice that and you orient to it, oh, well, where am I developing? How good of a mechanic am I? How good of a piano player am I? How many languages am I proficient at? You are orienting yourself to a potential for development, and then we make it possible to embody those capacities to develop and to enact them together with others in society. So those are the basic mechanics. But that means each person has to decide what policy do they believe in, and they have to stand for it and advocate for it. So that means enjoying rights comes with responsibilities.
Yeah.
And if we make that easy and enactable and even enjoyable, who knows what will happen, but what I believe that will certainly increase the likelihood that we'll be able to make that transformation.
Yeah, no, I agree with this part that we cannot take sovereignty away from people. But then the utopian idealist in me also feels like if we can put out a vision that is so compelling that the sovereign individual kind of sees clearly, oh yeah, that exactly, that's the direction I want to go. That's where my heart is opening, my soul is opening and not closing. And that's why I find the term of the third attractor so attractive, that because I think probably not everybody, not every sovereign soul can think their way into a better world easily. So having a vision somewhere with some basic values, goodness, truth, beauty, that we can aspire towards might be helpful. And then we still have to give everybody the sovereign power of decision. Is this what I want, or do I want to stick with the modern lifestyle, the growth philosophy, or with a traditional religious way of living my life?
Mm-hmm.
But to have something where people feel like, yeah, that's attractive. That feels right. Like deep down,
Mm-hmm.
where we have this kind of feeling what is right and wrong. But
Don't we
even
already
that
have?
is tricky.
Don't we already have that? We each have this compass. We can tell where our heart expands, where the lures of beauty, goodness, and truth are. We might not be able to articulate it, but we know it. When we experience it, we can see it in
Yeah,
nature, in our love for each other, or for a pet, or beautiful
exactly. No,
experience.
that's true. I can see that. But on the other hand, I'm also too aware of the different value systems in spiral dynamics and integral to know that when you have a hardcore materialist, their heart opens when they see an opportunity for material growth, for example, or for personal achievement. So I think that is an idealistic vision, and I share it with you that deep down we we tend to want more beauty, truth, and goodness, but the reality of everybody's 8 billion people's life is slightly different. Different values seem to sit on top of this intuition and almost manipulate our decision making.
Yeah, well, don't they? They say that each stage has both healthy and unhealthy aspects.
Yeah,
So a hardcore materialist, there's also a way to frame that as to see beauty, goodness, and truth in that agency relative to the dogmatic um, view of amber, for example.
sure. Yeah.
So it's, I think, meeting people where they are and creating upward currents.
Yeah. If you try to imagine the world in 100 years, when it goes well, when it goes towards this third attractor that we were describing over the last hour, what do you see? How does the world look like?
Well, from the exterior view, miraculously, it would be stop burning fossil fuels. And it would be an economic system that is calibrated to biospheric services. And this, I think, would also change our mentality because we would see ourselves as part of a greater system. It's a sort of a return to nature. And I think that would bring about a less, more, consume, us versus them mentality to a more lighter, wiser, responsible, egalitarian, regenerative way of thinking.
Mhm. Yeah, that's beautiful. How far in are you in your project of launching something, starting? How far out is your starting point, or have you started already? Are there pilots of what you have in mind available?
We finished a long R&D process and now have an high-level architecture finalized. We have opened our initial funding round and we have investors on board. It's a pretty interesting convergence because in some ways we are bringing the mentality of Silicon Valley type tech startups with Hollywood in a way of how films
Mm,
and stories are developed,
mm,
and the world of game development. So these are coming together in a pretty different way. So that is requiring a different kind of infrastructure and approach. And much like Rob shared, and he kind of threw the way he kind of throws the gauntlet down for those of us who are privileged to be at higher levels, higher worldviews, have a wider embrace, have a tremendous responsibility. So we're going to be assembling wisdom circles
mm.
to involve many of these leaders, and I hope to come back to you and some of your guests with opportunities to participate.
Oh, that would be cool.
Yeah, because there's a lot of work that has to be done to create the kind of curriculum and experiences
Yeah,
that the environment will need to make available.
yeah, yeah.
So we're moving as quickly as we can. It's incredibly difficult, but it's also very thrilling.
Yeah, I know. I can imagine. It must be, yeah, amazing. Is there any role for AI in your project, or how? What are your thoughts about AI in this context? It's kind of a obvious question nowadays, no?
Yes, but it's tricky because wow, that uses incredible amount of energy. And for us to be in
I
integrity
know.
with bringing about an ecological civilization, we have to be really mindful of where energy comes from, which is there's other, well, there's some things I can't say. I can't because we're not going public yet, but yes, there are ways. So with Chat GPT or Claude or other big LLMs, it's very general purpose. But there are ways to make lighter weight
Yep,
models that are more
yep,
specific in their purpose and
yep,
use less energy.
yep. Yeah, yeah, that
So
makes sense.
yes, we are going to be using it, but in a
Yeah.
way where the energy footprint is transparent.
Yeah. Oh, that's very good.
But it isn't going to be used in
Great.
the way most people think, where you have a box
Oh,
and you, in your own mind, decide what you want to ask. These are going to be
yeah.
more like NPCs who help train you as a performer in your life.
Oh,
So,
yeah, yeah.
some much
Now I'm
complete.
getting curious.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about it more. There's some
Yeah.
things I'm not allowed to say, but
Yeah, yeah.
it's
No,
it's going to
sure.
be pretty
That's perfect.
mind-blowing. I will say that.
Yeah.
There's going to be
Very good.
novel experiences that people
Yeah.
haven't seen before.
Cool. So is there anything else you wanted to bring in that we haven't covered yet? Otherwise, I feel like it's a very rounded conversation.
No, I really enjoyed the conversation, and I'm really grateful to you. I haven't gotten to watch all the conversations in your series yet,
Yeah.
but it's so important what you're doing, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And thank you for your time.
Thank you.